CGTN, China Global Television Network. Live from London, this is Global Business.
Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Li Jianhua.
And I'm Robin Dwyer. Our top stories. The United Nations warns of grave and far-reaching consequences from the destruction of the Novakakhovka Dam in an area of Russian-controlled Ukraine.
Pro golfers take a swing at a shock decision to merge major golfing tours with Saudi Arabia's Live League.
Smooth waters forecast for China's cruise industry as both a market and a destination.
And pens at the ready as 13 million Chinese students begin the National College entrance exam.
Ukraine says around 42,000 people are at risk from flooding after the destruction of the Novakakhovka Dam.
President Volodymyr Zelensky says the evacuation of people and provision of drinking water are top priorities in the region. Russia's state media reports that at least 7 people are missing. Kiev and Moscow have traded accusations over the collapse of the facility, and both have denied responsibility. UN Chief Martin Griffiths has condemned the action.
The destruction of the Kakhovka hydroelectric power plant dam is one of the most significant incidents of damage to civilian infrastructure since the start of the Russian invasion of Ukraine in February 2022. The sheer magnitude of the catastrophe will only become fully realized in the coming days. But it's already clear that it will have grave and far-reaching consequences for thousands of people in southern Ukraine on both sides of the front line, through the loss of homes, food, safe water and livelihoods.
Well, our correspondent Yolo Abdavid has been following the latest developments. Yolo.
Robin, Kakhovka was a dam and a hydroelectric power plant on the Dnieper River in southern Ukraine. It was the 6th and final dam built along the river in 1956, holding back a series of reservoirs with power plants all alongside. The town and port of Novakakhovka was built on the eastern side. The dam was strategic because of its sheer size and location. Water was used for agriculture to supply Crimea and also to cool reactors at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant. Now, fighting means the plant is mostly closed now, with only 1 reactor on standby. Kakhovka held back a reservoir that had a surface area of more than 2,000 square kilometers. The dam wall was 30 meters high and more than 3 kilometers long, with road and rail connecting both sides of the river. Now, satellite images show the dramatic change from before, when the dam wall was intact, to after Tuesday, when explosions destroyed a section of it, the breach beginning the inevitable flooding of farmland and communities further south. Especially 70 kilometers down towards Kherson, and villages, towns and villages, as well as agriculture and industrial facilities all along the riverbanks are flooded. Now, dozens of settlements are at risk, and tens of thousands of people may well have to be evacuated throughout this region.
So, Yolo, you're telling us about flooded homes, factories, and also fields, wide areas affected. So what's next for those affected regions? How important are the next 48 to 72 hours?
I think it's going to be crucial, because it's not just an area that's been flooded. It's also an area that needs humanitarian help. And there are probably towns and villages on both sides of the river that have been affected. And equally, it's a problem not just for the Ukrainian government in Kyiv, but the Russian authorities also, which are controlling the eastern side of the river, especially in the Kherson region. So there will be, according to the Interior Ministry of Kyiv, 10 towns and villages on the western side and 9 on the eastern side, which will need immediate help. Now, we know that now, so there'll be a rush to try and get, obviously, aid from both sides, but also possibly international aid. And all that, remember, in a war zone. It is still a fighting area. There are still drone strikes, artillery, and intense fighting further to the east.
And do we know who was responsible for the explosion?
Well, it depends who you talk to. If you talk to the Ukrainians, they blame the Russians. If you ask the Russians, and they say this is down to Ukraine. And that's the problem, because when the ambassadors of both countries met in the Security Council of the United Nations in New York, they both said that this is a criminal act. They both said this is an act of terrorism. They both called it an environmental disaster. But actually, the problem is they're blaming each other. We even had President Putin this afternoon saying this is a barbaric act. There is agreement about what's happened, it seems, but there's total disagreement who's to blame. And whether indeed, they will accept blame, it's highly questionable, but the focus will be on the environmental help that will be needed here. What are the potential ecological damages to the area, and how soon can that be averted? At the same time, it's a war zone. At the same time, tens of thousands of people potentially have to be helped.
So, as you say, Yolo, the focus now really on the environmental concerns. How soon do you think it will become clear enough to work out how bad the picture is and exactly what help is needed?
In one sense, the breach of that dam was quite small, a few hundred metres, rather than the entire 3 kilometres of the wall. But the water has been funneled through that small area. It takes time for that water to flow down. The peak of that water flood might be later today, this evening. But then, of course, there has to be an assessment of the damage, the flooding damage, the environmental damage, as well as what are the potential pollutions damage that will be done and possibly that will take more than a few days. I think, first of all, is how quickly the water recedes, or indeed if it does that in certain areas, because it's low land.
Yolo, thank you very much. That's our correspondent, Yolo Abdavid. Well, in the Russian-controlled town of Nova Kakhovka, a rescue operation is underway to free up to 100 people trapped after the collapse of the dam.
Local authorities say thousands of animals have been killed and the town is at risk of contamination from the floodwater. Let's talk to our correspondent Stuart Smith in Moscow. Stuart, what's happening with the rescue and evacuation process?
Well, it's in Nova Kakhovka where the focus is. That's where the highest water levels are, around 11 metres, around 3 stories. And that's also where residents are reportedly trapped. Still, around 100 of them being supported and trying to be rescued by Russian authorities in this area of Ukraine controlled by the Russian military. They said they're sending watercraft to that area and using aircraft as well to try to get them off the top of roofs, perhaps from their homes or buildings, because that's the only safe place for these residents at the moment. 3 other towns are in a similar situation to Nova Kakhovka. The rest of them, around 20, flooded, but not quite so dire. And in some of those, already the water level is going down. In others, it's still rising as the flood waters start to move on downstream. The difficulty for the rescue workers, they say, is that in some areas it's only accessible with heavy-duty equipment. In other areas, buses have been put on to take people from their homes to temporary shelters further away from the river. Around 350 have made use of those, according to Russia-installed officials in the region. Around 2,000 more have gone to friends and family to avoid the worst of the flood water. But it's still very much a situation which, although authorities say is in control, is by no means over.
Well, Stuart, the town's mayor is warning of contamination. What are the risks are there?
Yeah, that's right. Water is the big one. How to get fresh water to the population now that the water they would usually use is gone down the river from the reservoir, and the water they still have access to could be contaminated due to flowing through wastewater treatment plants and other nasty areas. The Russian authorities say people should only drink bottled water or use water purification tablets. But there's another concern when it comes to water. Because this reservoir was holding back all the water needed for irrigation in most of these regions of Ukraine, there's now a shortage anticipated, an agricultural shortage which could go long into the rest of this year and could jeopardize the harvest. In the Kherson region, they say 94% of the irrigation systems are dry. In Zaporizhia, that number is 74%. There's also the environmental catastrophe, thousands of animals dead that were living next to this river in a wildlife park, and also a huge number of fish expected Dead fish expected to be flowing down the river in the next few days as that reservoir dries up and they no longer have an environment to swim in. On top of all of that, there are still reports of shelling in the flooded areas.
Thank you very much. That is our correspondent Stuart Smith in Moscow.
Tens of thousands of employees at British Airways, the BBC and UK pharmacy chain Boots have had their private data stolen by a cybercrime gang. The group, known as Klopp, which is thought to be based in Russia, has claimed responsibility for the attack on the Move It software. Those impacted have been issued an ultimatum or face having their data published. Move It disclosed a security flaw last week that could have allowed hackers to intercept its servers.
The Turkish lira has plunged 7% to a new low against the US dollar after re-election of President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. It comes in the wake of a cabinet reshuffle with the Turkish leader tapping Mehmet Şimşek as the next finance minister. The fall brings the lira's total losses to nearly 16% in the past month.
Clothing chain Zara's parent company Inditex recorded a better-than-expected 54% rise in its first quarter profits. The world's biggest fast fashion firm says sales were positive in all the regions it operates in, and sales of its spring-summer collection rising 16% in May. Last week, Inditex's market capitalisation exceeded $107 billion for the first time.
British newspapers The Daily and the Sunday Telegraph, along with the Spectator magazine, are set to be put up for sale after talks between the owners and lenders collapsed. Lloyds Banking Group is looking to recover debts owned by the parent company, Press Acquisitions, which is estimated to be hundreds of millions of dollars. The newspapers and magazine have been valued at around $750 million.
Still to come on Global Business Europe. As Singapore's waste piles up, one man's on a mission to promote a move away from buy and throw to repair and keep.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos? And unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with Global Business, only on CGTN.
There's a new agenda for a new world, accelerating change in almost every part of our lives. It's shifting the norms of how we work, travel, and connect. How we think, interact, and develop. It's a new reality, a new agenda with me, Juliet Mann.
Welcome back. US Secretary of State Antony Blinken has met Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman in Jeddah amid strained relations between Washington and Riyadh. US officials say the two leaders held candid talks for an hour and 40 minutes, covering topics including Israel, human rights, the conflict in Yemen and unrest in Sudan. It comes as the countries have deepening disagreements over policies on Iran, oil prices and regional security concerns.
The British Prime Minister has arrived in the United States for his first visit to Washington since taking office. Rishi Sunak is due to meet President Joe Biden as well as business leaders and members of Congress.
A gunman has killed 2 people and wounded 5 others in Richmond in Virginia after shooting into a crowd of high school students after their graduation ceremony. A 19-year-old man was arrested near the school. Victims were an 18-year-old graduate and a 36-year-old man attending the ceremony.
Sri Lankan police have fired tear gas and water cannon at hundreds of student protesters in the capital Colombo. They want help with high cost of living and the release of student activists arrested in previous demonstrations. Protesters say government cuts in health and education budgets are impacting them, and they are calling for an increase in the monthly stipend.
Millions of people in North America are facing dangerously poor air quality as wildfires burn across Canada.
Canadian authorities say there were fires in nearly all provinces and territories, and thousands of people have been told to evacuate their homes. The disaster is being blamed on a particularly warm and dry spring.
Well, the effects are also being felt to the south of Canada in the United States, with cities including New York covered in an orange haze. Officials say that air quality has reached dangerous levels, with people warned not to exercise outside. China's exports shrank faster than expected last month, and imports extended declines, with a grim outlook for global demand.
Regardless, the world's second largest economy grew faster than expected in the first quarter, thanks to robust consumption and the backlog of orders delayed by COVID disruptions. But factory output has slowed as rising interest rates and inflation squeezed demand in the US and Europe.
In the United States, the trade deficit has widened by the most in 8 years, jumping 23% to $74.6 billion in April. Slowing global demand is curbing exports, and economists say that the terms of trade are worsening, which raises concerns about GDP growth. Well, let's talk to our correspondent, John Terrett in New York. So, John, let's talk about that China data. Did Wall Street react to that as well?
Well, they did, because we had our own set of very, very similar figures that were announced a few hours after the Beijing information was published. And so when we came in here early this morning, we were looking at what they call the futures markets, which is the prediction of how the Dow and the Nasdaq and the S&P are going to open, and all the other financial indicators that we have here on Wall Street, and they were all pretty much in the red. And I think at that time, certainly European stocks were in the red as well, and that's because that China data came out and it was a little bit worse than expected. And let me just try to explain it to you. I mean, basically, what we had here was China imports and exports. And the exports were down 7.5%, and the imports were down 4.5%. Now, the export number was a larger one than had been expected. The fall was greater than we had thought. And the problem here, of course, is China is such an important economy when it comes to basically propping up, in many respects, economies around the world, particularly this one, but particularly Europe. There's a lot of work that goes back and forth between China and the European Union, as you know. And so there was a pretty good, solid reason for the markets being in the red when we turned up here in New York early this morning. Then came the second set of figures, which are germane to the US economy, and I would say that they were mixed. Now, we call this the balance of trade figures, and it's basically the difference between the exports that go out from the United States economy around the world, and with particular interest in China, versus the imports. It's the trade deficit, in other words, the difference between the two. And these figures in New York were for the month of April. Now, they give them a dollar denomination, so it's easy to understand. We were expecting it to be at 75.8, but it came in at 74.6, so that is a little bit less. In other words, the difference, the deficit, was a little bit less than had been expected. However, it's still a jump of 23% in 1 month, and the figure is really a 6-month high, which is not terribly good. And this is because imports here rebounded strongly over the previous set of figures that we had, which was for the month of March. So, you know, at the moment, the markets in New York are, I would call them flat. The Dow is up 65 points, having been down earlier. So this didn't make a tremendous amount of difference. And as you know, with everything I talk about on this program, we immediately turn our attention to the next set of data. There isn't much coming in for the rest of the week, actually, but tomorrow, Thursday, there will be the weekly jobless numbers, which will be another indication about what might happen in pretty much a week's time when the central bank meets to discuss interest rates again. That's next Tuesday and next Wednesday. They'll make the decision a week today. And I have to tell you that it's all been about probably the Fed pausing then, Now, more and more people on Wall Street think that there might actually be a slight hike of 25 basis points, just like there was with the Bank of Australia earlier this week. And there's talk now of the cut-off point being 6% of US interest rates to calm 40-year high inflation, not the 5% that we're at the moment. So, as always, we're guessing, and it really is all eyes on next Tuesday and Wednesday.
Well, John, let's put the economy to one side for a moment and talk about diplomacy, because there's what looks like a warming of relations between Beijing and Washington.
Well, we know this, Robin, because when President Biden was in Hiroshima in Japan a couple of weeks ago for the G7, one of the things that he said that really stood out was the fact that he said, expect a thaw. And what he was talking about was relationships between D.C. and Beijing. And as you know, they've been pretty much at an all-time low, and they've been at a low during all of his presidency so far, when people were expecting them really to improve, and they have not. But here's the President of the United States hinting that there is a thaw on the way. And there's all sorts of chatter about leading political figures in America heading to China in the course of the next couple of weeks, couple of months. Now, we don't have any details particularly at the moment, but this is the chatter here on Wall Street. And what we do know is that some pretty significant business titans are going over to China. Now, there, right now, at this very moment, is Jane Fraser. Jane is from Scotland. She is one of the few women to head up a Fortune 500 company. She is the head of Citigroup, the giant, huge international bank. She's in China right now. And this comes just at the time that Biden is talking about a thaw. And the thing about these people going over is, they're like politicians. They might as well be politicians. They're not, but they might as well be. It's like a royal visit when somebody from a company as big as Citigroup goes on a visit overseas, particularly to China. And, of course, it comes after last week when we saw two very significant leading business people in China again. One was Elon Musk, who said of his staff at the Gigafactory in Shanghai that they were amazing. He said they were amazing. That's what he actually said. And he was there checking out the Gigafactory, his first visit for many years in his private jet. And also, very importantly, Jamie Dimon, who we think of as America's banker. Now, he heads up the biggest bank in America, JP Morgan Chase. It's one of the few banks that people pay much attention to here. Whatever he says is taken pretty much as gospel. And he was in China last week as well. So you can see that thaw that Biden was talking about appears to be coming true, Robin.
John, thank you very much for that. Good to talk to you. That's our correspondent, John Terrett, in New York.
The OECD says the world's economy is set to grow 2.7% this year, slightly up from March's forecast of 2.6%.
With the exception of pandemic-hit 2020, it's still the lowest annual growth rate since the global financial crisis of 2008. Economic activity is expected to speed up slightly next year to 2.9%. Among the G20 economies, China is forecast to see the sharpest rise in growth this year. But Germany, which is highly dependent on Russian energy exports, is predicted to see a 0.3% contraction next year.
The improvements in activity and sentiment come among a lowering in energy prices, easing headline inflation, and better prospects brought on by China's reversal of its zero-COVID policy in December last year. We project global GDP to grow at a rate of 2.7% this year and 2.9% next year.
As Germany looks to ease its economic woes, it's hoping trade with China will help. For the last 7 years, China has been Germany's biggest trading partner.
This week, Chinese manufacturers have been showing off their latest consumer goods in the German city of Essen for the first time since COVID restrictions were lifted. Our correspondent Peter Oliver reports.
More than 500 Chinese suppliers show off over 20,000 products, including household goods, electronics, clothing and furniture. China's consumer manufacturers are back meeting face-to-face with one of their largest markets after several years away because of the pandemic. Among them is electronic bike and scooter manufacturer Rulind, based out of Shenzhen. They told me that it is increasingly important to show that you have a product that takes environmental protection seriously.
Environmental protection is very important to our friends all over the world, so our products and all of the packaging that we use accords to strict international requirements. For example, we have strict inspections by the Consumer Standards Authority in Germany, and we also have to make sure that what we sell can be disposed of safely and sustainably when its life comes to an end. Our aim is to ensure that our products meet the standards and then bring an environmentally friendly product to everyone.
Batteries are most definitely included at this gathering of Chinese manufacturers. Another Shenzhen-based company, Best Technology Co. Limited, are banking on communal power banks being the future of mobile phone charging on the go. The idea is that you scan a code from the terminal, it gives you a charger to fit your device, which you rent. They're pitching these as the way to stop festival goers in Europe this summer from running out of juice, with one eye on the sustainability of the finite resources in batteries.
Our power banks are shared. This will reduce the purchase of power banks. If everyone owns their own, at some point that will just be sitting idle. That's a waste of resources. The number of power banks is very harmful to the earth. It can cause pollution, but we all need power. That's why we're promoting the shared power bank model.
Chinese manufacturers seeking to reduce their environmental impact has certainly struck a chord with German-based businesses scouting for new products.
We are living in 21st century, and I think the last 20 years, and we start to understand the importance of the environment-friendly products more, and that's important point also for the producers, for the sellers, how we can make it more environment-friendly step by step.
Many of the products making their way from China to Europe come here to Duisburg, and the continent's largest inland container port. The harbour has seen a 187% year-on-year increase in goods coming through its terminals for the first 3 months of this year. That is as China's export economy springs back into action following COVID slowdowns. This is crucial for the German economy, which slipped into recession in the first part of this year. Trade between Berlin and Beijing was worth around $320 billion in 2022. Peter Oliver, CGTN, Germany.
China's first domestically built large cruise liner has left the dock where it was built for the first time, a key stage ahead of its delivery later this year.
It comes as the country's shipbuilding industry eyes a growing market with more vessels planned. Our correspondent Wu Bing reports.
Adora Magic City is China's first domestically built large cruise ship. After over 3 years of construction, it's left the building dock for the first time. Several small ships pulled Adora Magic City to the main channel of the Yangtze River Delta and then moved it to another dock alongside the river. It's considered a major step before delivery. In 2016, China's State Shipbuilding Corporation, the country's largest shipbuilding conglomerate, together with Italian shipbuilding company Fincantieri, signed an agreement to set up a joint venture with the aim of developing and expanding the Chinese cruise industry.
We all know that before COVID-19, China was already the second biggest market in cruise. And more importantly, we all know the potential that this market has. Therefore, I strongly believe that Fincantieri and CSSC, they are in the best position ever to develop the Chinese domestic cruise market together in the long term.
Adora is over 320 meters long and 37 meters wide. It can accommodate almost 5,300 passengers in its over 2,800 cabins. To build such a ship is no doubt a challenge. The liner has 25 million components, double the number needed to build an aircraft carrier. After the undocking, the ship is expected to conduct 2 trial sails in July and August. Although it's typhoon season in East China at this time of year, the designers are confident there will be no issues.
From the engineering manager's point of view, we just have to do a good job of planning ahead. It is not like typhoons occur every day. We will conduct trial sails when there is no typhoon. But at the same time, we have an emergency plan to pull the ship back to its building dock to avoid any typhoons.
The designer says the company has already met its annual goal for new orders this year. With work beginning last year on another, even larger cruise ship, there's no knowing just how quickly this industry may grow. Wu Bing, CGTN, Shanghai.
Well, let's get more insight from Stuart Chiron, who's known as the cruise guy. Stuart, so this makes China the 5th country in the world capable of building large cruise ships. Why is China keen on building its own cruise liners?
Well, I think rather than relying on foreign-built ships and companies, China wanted to take the shipbuilding and the cruise model and be able to have their own cruise brands sailing their own cruise ships. So it makes complete sense. And obviously, the previous story mentioned Fincantieri, but they've also got, the joint venture is actually with Carnival Corporation. So this ship is a Carnival, essentially a Carnival Dream class ship, which is about 135,000 tons and can hold about 5,600 passengers. So they're getting a lot of experience in a very short manner.
And how big is China's cruise market?
Well, it's a tremendous cruise market. I mean, it was expected to be close to at around the 3rd largest. There's a tremendous amount of people, but it was just the lack of available ships. The bulk of the ship inventory is global, so it's all around the world. But the Chinese passengers, it started back in 2006 when Carnival Corporation's Costa Cruises started to sail there. Then we had other cruise lines like Royal Caribbean is now the dominant. You had Norwegian for a short period of time. Princess and Carnival were going to, but it just seemed to develop that the best way to grow it was to create its own brand and build its own ships.
And what challenges remain in building a cruise tourism market in China? And the country has just lifted the restrictions because of COVID-19.
Yeah, the restrictions, I mean, China and Asia are the last regions of the world to come back online, which is why it's going to take it could take up to a decade to see a pre-pandemic level of cruise ship sailing from China, because the ships have been redeployed to other cruise lines and other regions of the world. But, in short order, look, these are floating resorts. They can be moved based on demand and availability. And hopefully the Chinese guests will be able to take longer vacations rather than just the short spurts that they've gone traditionally. It's a tremendous opportunity. I mean, I just spent, 2 cruises in the Mediterranean, and it was really nice to see so many Chinese passengers sailing again around the world in different regions.
So you think it would take around 10 years to return to the pre-pandemic levels? And if we look at a recent study published in Marine Pollution Bulletin, a large cruise ship can have a carbon footprint greater than 12,000 cars. How will the campaign to achieve net zero emissions curtail cruise tourism in China and beyond?
Well, they're all working on it, and now the industry is leading its way in the marine category. But those studies are antiquated and not using the best available information, especially with the liquefied natural gas ships that are coming online, and some of the ships that are being developed to use different forms of fuel. That information isn't accurate anymore.
Thanks very much. That is Stuart Chiron.
Today, around 13 million Chinese students are taking the National College Entrance Exam, known as Gaokao. The assessment, which usually lasts 3 days, is considered one of the most important of a student's life.
The exam season comes as some question whether a college education leads to better employment opportunities. Our correspondent Lu Saray reports.
Gaokao has always been considered a life-changing event for Chinese people. In the past, having a college student was an honor for the family. Getting into a good college not only represented better knowledge, but also better jobs with higher incomes. But nowadays, more young people are realizing their higher educational degrees cannot guarantee them higher paid jobs. Also, many jobs require less academic achievements, but more vocational training. However, due to misconceptions about the value of university degrees in the job market, vocational schools have not been popular.
We have entered the era of universal tertiary. 20 years ago, the gross enrollment rate of higher education was 10%, but now it's close to 60%. Many people did not realize this issue and still believe that a higher academic degree represents higher income. However, in reality, if you lack high skills and abilities, it is also difficult to gain favor in the job market.
China has been taking countermeasures to the aimless pursuit of high academic diploma. It has cancelled extra academic tuition classes and revised laws to develop vocational schools, hoping to divert students to fulfill the needs of job markets.
Actually, our universities serve different purposes. If you choose an elite education, then in the short term, it should not be oriented towards employment, but rather focus on academic and research pursuits. On the other hand, vocational colleges are oriented towards meeting employment demands, so they aim to develop students' job skills. Therefore, education and employment cannot be equated.
All occupations are equally respectable, in fact. If a child is not suitable for academic study, he should not feel bad about going through vocational school and being able to establish himself in the society even earlier than the academic students.
While parents are becoming more practical, they still hold high expectations about the academic achievements of their children.
I think liberal arts education is very important to one's development. My kid will start picking specific industries and fields during the master or doctoral program.
So I hope my child would study AI for undergraduate and explore its application during the master and doctoral program.
Gaokao is still considered the most difficult test in the world, and it has been portrayed as an army of thousands of men crossing a single log bridge. But experts say there's much needs to be done to reform college courses and to provide more high-quality vocational education. Perhaps in the future, Gaokao may not be as intimidating as students have various ways to fulfill a life. Wu Siray, CGTN, Beijing.
Well, good luck to those students. You can get headlines from the week's news in Europe and China direct to your inbox from CGTN's Storyboards email newsletter. Sign up at europe.cgtn.com/newsletter.
Still to come on Global Business Europe, a deal that's shocked the world of golf. But will the merger of Saudi Arabia's Live League with two major tours be a win for the sport?
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there to see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you, all around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London, China Global Television Network. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference. Facing the unknown is always difficult. In a world in turmoil, it's easy to lose orientation. But when the storms come, we have to see the possibilities, reinvent, find new opportunities, discover a path forward. CGTN. See the difference. What do we mean when we talk about the difference?
Brazen axe.
The difference is in the detail, the background,
Defense ministers from
the wider angle and perspective of every story. Wherever the story may be. CGTN. See the difference.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe with Robin Dwyer and Li Jianhua. The headlines again. The United Nations warns of grave and far-reaching consequences from the destruction of the Nova Kakhovka Dam in an area of Russian-controlled Ukraine.
And smooth waters forecast for China's cruise industry as both a market and a destination.
Golfing champion Rory McIlroy says the new partnership between the PGA Tour and LIV Golf will ultimately be good for the sport.
The world number 3 player was speaking a day after the PGA Tour, the DP World Tour and the Saudi-backed LIV Circuit announced a surprise merger. The news sparked shock and anger amongst some players, with PGA Tour Commissioner Jay Monahan facing calls to resign.
For players, I'm not surprised that, this is an awful lot to ask them to digest. And this is a significant change for us, in the direction that we were going down. But as I'm trying to explain, and I will continue to explain as we go forward, this ultimately is a decision that I think is in the best interest of all of the members of the PGA Tour.
Well, Rory McIlroy says he hadn't expected the deal to happen so quickly, but believes it will bring financial benefits.
Whether you like it or not, the PIF are going to keep spending money in golf. At least the PGA Tour now controls how that money is spent. So if you're thinking about one of the biggest sovereign wealth funds in the world, would you rather have them as a partner or an enemy? At the end of the day, money talks, and you'd rather have them as a partner.
Let's talk now to Josh Carpenter, who's Assistant Managing Editor for the magazine Sports Business Journal. Welcome to the programme, Josh. We've heard Rory McIlroy saying that this will ultimately be good for golf. He certainly didn't welcome this merger warmly, though. So do you think the sport of golf wins or loses from this?
I think it's a little bit too soon to tell. I mean, this really came as a shock, I think, to everyone, but really a handful of people who kind of orchestrated this deal. We're just over 24 hours from it being announced, so it'll take a little bit of time to really digest it and figure out how good or how bad it is for the game. From a pure competition standpoint, look, the PGA Tour gets an influx of cash. I mean, the number, I think, $3 billion has been thrown out there that they're getting from the public investment fund of Saudi Arabia. So certainly they're going to have more money at their disposal. Their chief competitor for the last year to 18 months in LIV Golf is off the board, so they don't have to worry about the ongoing litigation is going to end. So that competitor's off the board. They're going to have more money at their disposal to they can control that money now, right? With that investment. So that's from a pure competition standpoint. The flip side of that, there are a lot of people who have issues with the Saudi funding. We all know, some of the human rights issues they have in that country. And so there are a lot of really staunch PGA Tour supporters who are against LIV Golf because of that Saudi funding. So now it's really going to be a thing of seeing how those supporters, whether it be fans, whether it be sponsors, whether it be network, television partners, how they react to this influx of cash from Saudi Arabia.
Well, I should say there has been some criticism of this move by Saudi Arabia, some people calling it sports washing. What do you make of it?
Well, listen, I'm not going to pretend to be an expert on sports washing or human rights issues, but I think the definition of sports washing is when you see a company that has some, or not a company, a country that has some of these issues, they pump money into sports so that it makes them look a little bit better. And if you look at Saudi Arabia, the money that they put into, Premier League soccer, into Formula One racing, and now into golf, it seemed, as Rory McIlroy said earlier today, it seemed kind of inevitable that Saudi Arabia money was going to come into golf at some point. So whether it's sports washing or not, I don't know. But the fact that, you just asked me a question and I'm sitting here talking about just strictly the competition standpoint that golf might be better because of some of this money that's coming in. One might say that kind of accomplishes their goal, right? And also Saudi Arabia has wanted a seat at the table in global golf. And they had a seat with Live Golf, and now they're going to have an even bigger seat with the partnering with the PGA Tour.
So how awkward will this be for players like Rory McIlroy, who originally refused to move over because this whole thing got pretty acrimonious, didn't it?
Yeah, it did. There were a lot of relationships, I think, that player to player, maybe that won't be repaired between Rory and some others. And listen, a lot of the players who left the PGA Tour to join Live Golf, they sued the PGA Tour. And when you sue the PGA Tour, in effect, you sue their members as well. So you've got players like Phil Mickelson, some of these other guys who were on this lawsuit, they're suing their former colleagues at the PGA Tour. So there can be a lot of hurt feelings. On the tour side, you've got guys like Rory, like Tiger, like Hideki Matsuyama, who were offered just these huge sums of money to join Live. They stayed loyal to the tour and turned Live down because of the Saudi funding or whatever. And now the tour's a partner with that very investment fund that they were speaking out against. So Jay Monahan's going to have his hands full when it comes to mending these relationships with these players and getting them to trust him again.
So what does it mean for the immediate future of golf, the upcoming Ryder Cup and other events, and perhaps later on the future of the sport?
Yeah, the future of the sport's going to be interesting. Based on Jay Monahan's comments yesterday and then again this morning, it seems like Live Golf, as it currently exists, probably will not exist beyond this year. Live's going to play out the rest of their 2023 schedule. But beyond that, Jay said yesterday that he doesn't see it as being feasible for the two tours to play kind of concurrently at the same time. So it'll be interesting. But he did say also that he wants to kind of interject that team concept into this new company, this new global golf entity that they're forming, along with Live and the PIF and the DP World Tour. So it seems like Live is maybe going away. But beyond that, it's really still hard to figure out what it'll look like next year, and even in 5 years down the road. I certainly think with the DP World Tour being part of this, with the PIF being part of this, I think you're not going to just see a U.S. based tour. You'll certainly see them hit some markets, play in some markets and countries that maybe they haven't played in as much, in the past. So that's, I think, one thing to look out for.
Josh, good to talk to you. Thanks for sharing your thoughts today. That's Josh Carpenter from Sports Business Journal magazine.
Pope Francis has been taken to hospital in Rome for an operation on his abdomen. It's the latest in a series of health issues for the 86-year-old. The Vatican says he has been in pain and will stay in hospital for several days. He appears in good spirits earlier in the day during his general audience in St. Peter's Square.
The world's largest sand island off the east coast of Australia has had its indigenous name reinstated after a decades-long campaign. Guri Island, which translates to paradise in the local language, had been known as Fraser Island for nearly 200 years. The name had been deemed culturally inappropriate by the island's Butchulla people.
Britain's Prince Harry has returned to the High Court in London to give a second day of evidence over claims that UK tabloids targeted him with phone hacking and other unlawful behaviour. He's one of the more than 100 celebrities suing the Mirror Group newspapers over alleged unlawful activities between 1991 and 2011. Prince Harry is the first senior British royal to appear in a witness box in more than 100 years.
Former Republican New Jersey Governor Chris Christie has launched his 2024 U.S. presidential campaign, closely following in the footsteps of former Vice President Mike Pence. Christie, a one-time advisor to former President Donald Trump, has turned into a fierce critic, calling Trump a self-serving mirror hog at his launch event. Pence also fell out with Trump, the current Republican frontrunner, over his false claims that the 2020 election was rigged.
The Nigerian government has launched a 10-year strategy to build more homes in the country as it seeks more private investment in public housing projects.
But some experts say that the government also needs to make home ownership easier and more affordable. Our correspondent Ajik Mangut has more from Abuja.
Abraham Ega is scrolling through housing offers for his family. The businessman says he has unsuccessfully tried to buy a house in the last 3 years because it's too expensive.
One of my attempts, I faced the issue of, excess middlemen involved, which inflated the cost of the property, and I ended up not being able to make up the payment. And since then, that opportunity has gone. I've not been able to save up enough yet to do an outright payment.
The Federal Mortgage Bank of Nigeria estimates that Nigeria requires at least 28 million housing units to close its housing gap. A growing urban population, increasing construction costs, lack of an efficient mortgage system, poverty, high inflation and declining household income have made access to decent and affordable housing difficult. However, last month, the government launched a 10-year housing strategy that's expected to attract more capital investment from the private sector. It will see more of them take part in the construction of houses in the country. It's also expected to improve the quality of houses built while reducing the construction costs. But experts are concerned about the viability of the plan.
The federal government in itself, from past regimes, they've adopted several models, especially from the side of the Federal Mortgage Bank. Even the plan they have is still going to fall short of what they need to do, because we're talking about their last count being at 28 million housing deficit. Today, I'm sure we're over 30 million housing deficit. There has to be a holistic look. The tenor for the loans, how the loans are financed, the available cash from people's revenue that can be made available for payment for their mortgages.
Experts have also cautioned that most Nigerians cannot afford the houses currently on offer.
The interest from government in the real sector, meaning that they have to show vested interest in knowing where the developers get their materials from, how to make it affordable, what credit facilities can be made available to them to make sure they deliver these houses at cost-effective price. Because if you averagely take within the FCT now, if you really want to buy a good house, you can't look less than 30 million. How many civil servants between level 7 and level 14 can actually afford houses for 30 million?
Just last month, the Federal Mortgage Bank of Nigeria announced an increase in its National Housing Fund mortgage loan limit from $32,188 to $64,377 per applicant. And this could see Nigerians like Abraham finally able to buy their dream homes. Ajik Mangut, CGTN, Abuja.
You're watching CGTN Still Ahead. Italy's centuries-old silk mills, will they soon be a thing of the past, or can they weave a path for the future?
Events have consequences. Words create impact.
Unprecedented scenes that we saw. The clean-up operation is now well and truly underway.
Parts of southern Europe remain in a state of emergency.
Context gives meaning. People make history.
Far more than 1,000 people have come here today.
But authorities are still on high alert.
So into the attention of world leaders.
A complex world demands a comprehensive view.
But with the cleanup efforts more or less under control,
the economic impact is bound to ripple across the country.
There's plastic pollution everywhere.
Because the world today matters for your world tomorrow.
This is the living area of the crew. And in these mountains, they recently finished building a power plant.
Well, this is something completely different.
The world today, every day on CGTN.
Hello, welcome back. For centuries, Italy has been renowned for its production of silk. The process is believed to have been brought back from China by missionaries almost 1,000 years ago.
But over the years, the number of Italian silk mills has been shrinking. Our correspondent Giles Gibson has been to Florence to find out how one fashion brand is trying to keep the tradition alive.
They've been making silk fabrics in this building just like this for hundreds of years. At the Antico Settificio Fiorentino, or Old Silk Factory, raw silk is spun into yarn before different threads are woven together to make intricate patterns. It looks like there's a lot going on, but these traditional looms only produce a few meters of fabric every day.
The connection between the Antico Settificio Fiorentino and Florence goes way back beyond.
For Filippo Ricci, creative director of Stefano Ricci, it's more than just a manufacturing process.
Just when you walk inside into the Settificio, it's like listening to a beautiful orchestra, because you see these hand looms weaving at a very slow speed together with the modern looms. We call them modern, but they are from 1850, which go at a little stronger speed. And those together combined create this music, as I say, that create the fabrics.
Much of Florence's historical wealth was built on silk production. The city was once home to 8,000 looms. The Antico Settificio Fiorentino was founded by a group of aristocratic families in the 18th century. By 2010, the number of looms in Florence had dwindled to just a few. And the Stefano Ricci company stepped in to buy the factory and its unique heritage. Some of the equipment in this building is hundreds of years old, and this machine, which is known as a warper, is very special. It was originally built in the early 1800s, but it's actually based on a much older design from Leonardo da Vinci himself.
La nostra storia è variegata tra l'antico e il moderno.
The mill's general manager, Elisabetta Bardelli Ricci, told us why that history is so important.
La famiglia ha deciso di acquistare questa azienda per amore.
The family decided to buy the factory because of love, because of passion. My father-in-law had tea with the previous owner, the Marchioness of Pucci, and fell in love with it. So it's about our passion and love of craftsmanship, which is a fundamental philosophy of the Ricci family.
Per il fatto a mano, che sono le basi di quella che è la filosofia.
The factory now boasts some high-profile clients. These jackets were made for the Italian opera singer Andrea Bocelli. The design might be a bit different to what a Florentine noble would have worn, but the process, the craftsmanship, has barely changed in hundreds of years. Giles Gibson for CGTN, Florence.
Our headlines again. The United Nations warns of grave and far-reaching consequences from the destruction of the Nova Kakhovka Dam in an area of Russian-controlled Ukraine.
Smooth waters forecast for China's cruise industry as both a market and destination.
And pro golfers take a swing at the shock decision to merge major golfing tours with Saudi Arabia's Live League.
That is for Global Business Europe. Thanks for watching.
There's more on all our stories at europe.cgtn.com, and do follow CGTN Europe on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram.
And you can go to CGTN Europe's channel on the Telegram app or scan the QR code on the screen to get stories and updates sent direct to your phone.
Coming up next on CGTN, it's Africa Live. We'll see you again tomorrow. Same time, same place. From all of the team here in London, it's goodbye.
Goodbye.